Greetings, Buzzkills fam. Moji and I are on vacation, but we didn't want to leave you hanging. And we wanted to give you a juicy encore presentation of the EMTALA Supreme Court case so you can get your brains thinking. We know abortion's on the ballot and we know why we need to vote for it. And this Supreme Court decision is one of the most important ones that you can actually bite into. So have a listen. And then when you get to the cabin with your family, you can drop some knowledge. Enjoy. We'll see you on the backside in September. Welcome to Feminist Buzzkills, the show that is really needing a win. I'm Liz Winstead, joined by my co-host, Moji Alawode.
Hello. Today, we're going to break down the Supreme Court's non-decision on the Idaho EMTALA case from the perspective of those intimately affected by the ruling.
That's right. A lawyer, a doctor, an activist, and someone who has experienced firsthand the trauma of being denied care in an emergency room. From the Lawyering Project, a woman who's argued abortion cases before the Supreme Court, Stephanie Toti is here. Co-president of the Idaho Coalition for Safe Healthcare, Dr. Caitlin Gustafson, executive director of Pro-Voice Project in Idaho, Jen Jackson Quintano is here, and Ryan Hamilton, who, along with his wife, has experienced the trauma of being denied abortion care firsthand in emergency rooms in Texas.
What an incredible group of experts we have, Liz.
I like this, bringing all these different perspectives, because these folks have a lot. You know, Stephanie's going to really lay out for us like what this means from a legal perspective. And we have people who are providing care and doing activism in Idaho to talk about what they've experienced. And then topping it off with Ryan, who can really speak to what it means for him. I mean, this case does not help his family because Texas is a mess. So I'm excited about that. So let's break down for folks before we get to all these amazing guests. Let's just give a little bit of a recap of what this case actually is.
Okay, let's do it. So the case basically starts with Idaho implementing an abortion ban. And in their abortion ban, they essentially say no abortions for anyone ever unless death is imminent.
Right. And that means that literally these scenarios we've seen over and over again of people dying in parking lots, whatever. Well, the federal government was like, hold up. We actually have a federal law that says, it was from the 1970s, from their boyfriend, Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. It was the 80s, and it was Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. And Ronald Reagan said, you know what? There's too much patient dumping at emergency rooms, which means people were just dumping patients and leaving, and emergency rooms were not caring for them. So this act called EMTALA was created that says if you are a hospital that accepts Medicaid funding, you cannot leave a patient without care. You have to provide stabilizing care for them and without cost.
And regardless of their ability to pay.
Yes.
And basically when Dobbs happened 2 years ago, and all of these states started enacting abortion bans, the Biden administration said, hey guys, I see you guys doing what you want to do now that this right has been returned to states to do what they want to do. But remember, we have this federal statute in place in EMTALA, and it says, regardless of what your law is, if a person shows up who is dying, who needs stabilizing care, you got to provide that stabilizing care in the emergency room.
In Idaho and Texas, two very different cases. Idaho was like, oh, hell no, we have a law that says you have to be dying or no abortion. And it was challenged, right? And so the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said, you know what? While we look at this ruling, you have to provide care under these federal guidelines.
And the state of Idaho said, Supreme Court, friends of ours, look at what the Ninth Circuit is doing. Can you let them know that we have this ban and this ban should stand? And the Supreme Court in January said, we have to think about it, but in the interim, absolutely, let's stop providing any sort of emergency abortion care in the hospitals unless someone is imminently dying.
Until we figure out what we're going to do. So then the case went to the Supreme Court. They argued it. It was leaked. It was leaked. The decision was leaked on Wednesday, and Thursday they came down with their ruling, and the ruling was a 6-3 ruling that said basically we're going to lift the ban that we put in place we're going back to saying, you know what, Idaho, you have to follow the federal guidelines, but we're going to kick everything back to the Ninth Circuit Court, and it's going to start going through the process all over again. So it's not a win.
It's not as bad as it could be. They could have decided that it's absolutely fine to let people suffer until they're close to death, but it's not a win.
Right. And I think the thing that to sort of mention before we get to breaking it all down is Texas also has a case, and Texas goes through a different circuit court. As we talked about on this podcast constantly, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is Texas, and the Texas Supreme Court and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said, you know what, EMTALA, we don't need that here. And so Texas people who have been through this hell, these people who have filed lawsuits, get no relief whatsoever.
None.
So somehow it seems like for the untrained eye, it seems like this could be a tiny bit of a win for the 6 people that will be able to access emergency abortion care in Idaho and various states. But it's really not a win if the Supreme Court doesn't definitively just say, this is how we are going to define what this means. And this law definitively has to be implemented in all 50 states in emergency rooms.
So again, we have collected a group of incredible experts to come and give all kinds of different and important perspectives on how this will impact them, their clients, and their patients. And Liz, I can't wait to get started talking to people.
Let's kick it off with the legal ramifications, shall we?
Yeah, let's.
She is the executive director of the Lawyering Project and was the winning attorney in the watershed SCOTUS case, Whole Women's Health v. Hellerstedt, to the U.S. Supreme Court. Please welcome Esquire extraordinaire Stephanie Toti. Hey, Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hey, Liz. Hey, Moji. Great to see you.
You too. Welcome back. And we're so excited to be talking to you about the decision in this EMTALA case because, you know, I think it's confusing to explain to regular folks because, you know, we all feel that, like, as Ketanji Brown Jackson said, you know, this isn't really a win, but some people will be able to get abortions. And so I guess I just want to dive in with you to sort of lay out how we can explain that a narrow group of people can access abortion care in some circumstances, and we're happy. But since we kind of know this isn't a win, it's a push or a delay or a pause, can you explain what that means to people and what they actually did in this ruling?
Sure. Basically, today's decision is a non-decision. The court said that it was a mistake for it to get involved in the case so early on. And so it's sending it back to the lower courts for further development. So essentially, the court today declined to do any further harm. And there are lots of people who take that as a win. Like, given how bad things are right now, the fact that they didn't make it any worse.
I'm going to stop beating you, which is a win.
Right, exactly. They're like, oh, great, this is so much better than we expected, but it's not good. And it's, you know, it's not okay. It's not enough.
It's also not done. That's the other part.
Right, exactly. It's going to go back to the lower courts. It will probably make its way back to the Supreme Court at some point. And in the meantime, the state of Texas had filed a lawsuit around the same time that this suit was filed, you know, saying the opposite of what the federal government says, that the, you know, states have no obligation to allow emergency abortion care if they ban abortion. And the Fifth Circuit, which is the appeals court that oversees Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, agreed with Texas and said that people never have a right to emergency abortion care if state law denies it. And that ruling remains in effect. What the Supreme Court did today doesn't disturb that ruling. So as of now, people in different parts of the country, you know, are facing different rules when it comes to emergency abortion care. And that's not okay. But even so, even for, you know, for the people in Idaho who are going to get some benefit from this decision, I think it's really important to keep in mind that it's only a very small group of people. We're talking about abortion care in circumstances where people are facing an urgent medical emergency. But there are lots more people who need abortion care for a wide variety of reasons, including health-related reasons, but also, reasons related to their dignity, to their, desire to live their lives in a certain way. And those people in Idaho are still not going to be able to access abortion care in the state. So maybe there's some limited victory in what the court did today, but it's not nearly enough.
No, it's not at all. And that's what Justice Jackson actually suggested in her concurrence. She said SCOTUS could have done a ruling that would have given clarity to all 50 states, including the people in Texas you referenced, but everywhere that has an abortion ban that leaves doctors unsure of how to proceed when they're dealing with these truly emergent, truly horrifying situations. What could they have done had Justice Jackson been 100% in charge of this decision? Which I'd love for that to be true for all SCOTUS decisions. There, I said it.
I think we would all love for that to be true. The court could have clearly held that EMTALA, the federal statute at issue in this case, preempts state law, which means that in every circumstance where emergency abortion care is needed, it authorizes doctors to provide that care without any question about whether they could face criminal prosecution under state law. The court could have done that today, but it did not.
And for those who sort of haven't been following, basically, like you said, it was a non-ruling and they handed it back to the Ninth Circuit to do something with it. Can you just walk people through, now that it's back in the arms of the Ninth Circuit, what does that mean for moving forward? And what does that mean for this case or subsequent cases like it to end up back at the Supreme Court?
It means that there's likely to be many months, if not years, of proceedings before this issue is completely resolved in one way or the other. So now that it's back at the Ninth Circuit, the Ninth Circuit never issued a ruling on the merits in this case. It had only weighed in on the emergency stay motion that the state of Idaho had made. And the Ninth Circuit, initially a panel of the Ninth Circuit, granted the state's motion, but then the full court, all of the active judges, which are known as the en banc court, they reversed that decision and decided to uphold the injunction that the trial court had issued. So the injunction basically allows doctors to provide abortion care in circumstances that are authorized by the federal law, but prohibited by state law. So the Ninth Circuit, the full Ninth Circuit, affirmed the injunction, which allows doctors to provide emergency abortions in the circumstances authorized by the statute. But the Ninth Circuit, that's just a preliminary ruling. The Ninth Circuit never weighed in on the actual merits of the case after full briefing and oral argument. So now there's likely to be full briefing and oral argument at the Ninth Circuit, but that's still only on a preliminary injunction motion. Whatever happens at the Ninth Circuit, the case is likely to go back to the district court, which is the trial level court, for further proceedings there, and then work its way back up to the appellate court, and then potentially back up to the Supreme Court, along with that Texas case that I mentioned, which had been decided by the Fifth Circuit. So the federal government filed a petition for Supreme Court review in that case, and the Supreme Court is just holding on to it. And likely they're not going to do anything in that case until this one works its way back up again. And so it's going to be months, if not years, before we have an ultimate resolution here.
So, Stephanie, we talk a lot about the Fifth Circuit because so many cases come through the Fifth Circuit. And also, I feel like this clown car of a court, like even this Supreme Court's like, Jesus, another reversal of your shitbag rulings. But we don't know, or I don't know, maybe Moji you do, but I know you do, Stephanie. Can you tell people a little bit like where on the pendulum of like, we know the Fifth Circuit's probably the scariest lower court. Where is the Ninth Circuit in all of this? What are the judges like? Are they more abortion forward? I don't know.
The Ninth Circuit is generally considered to be one of the more progressive circuits in the country, but there are a lot of Trump appointees on the court now, and so it is not as reliably progressive as it used to be, and it's very possible to get a bad panel of judges in the Ninth Circuit. And so typically, when an appeals court here's a case, 3 judges come together, and those 3 judges are called a panel, and they're randomly selected from all the judges on the court. And so, the Ninth Circuit is also the largest appeals court in the country. There are dozens of active judges on the Ninth Circuit. And so, you select 3 of them at random, you could get a very progressive panel, you get a very conservative panel, you get something in the middle. When the whole court comes together en banc, I would say that a majority of the court, is, some might call it progressive, some might just call it reasonable, committed to upholding the rule of law. That's sort of the situation there.
Speaking of appeal, actually, Justice Barrett laid out a little bit of a roadmap to get back, right? I feel like there were a couple of points she made. One was, she sort of narrowed EMTALA by saying, if you've hit viability, this imaginary space that has been established.
Judges invented.
The judges invented. Then delivery, not abortion, is the treatment, which also for me on one level seems a little bit unreasonable because most people who come and need EMTALA treatment are often pretty later in their pregnancies if they're near viability, and delivery is what they would want. It's almost like she's created a cure for a problem that doesn't exist. Does that seem reasonable, like a reasonable interpretation of that statement?
Yes. And let me just say first that, there were several concurring and dissenting opinions in this case. None of them represent the opinion of the court, and none of them have the force of law. So they are all just, they reflect the views of the individual judges who wrote those opinions or who joined those opinions, but they're not the official opinion of the court. All the official opinion says is we're dismissing this case as improvidently granted and vacating the stays that we issued previously. But yes, it seems like conservatives and abortion opponents are obsessed with this idea of abortions at 37 weeks of pregnancy, and that is not a real problem. That is not something that occurs on a regular basis, if ever. Nobody is having an abortion that late in pregnancy, and unless there's some kind of, rare and, like wildly unique emergency, but it's not a real problem. But it is something that abortion opponents and conservatives more generally are just like obsessed with for some, bizarre reason.
I kind of feel like the reason they're obsessed with it is because it's so rare to have that kind of abortion that they get to paint the narrative of what that is, because there's so few people that can counter that narrative, because most people who've had abortions are like, that's utter bullshit. They can't challenge the realities of abortion because there's way too many people who've had them. But, you start saying this whole, abortions after birth and all these crazy things they say, like Amy Coney Barrett laid it up, but like, Steph, can we talk about Sam Alitos? It was so unhinged, his dissent, talking about, I didn't even know at one point, I saw that he was talking about how, and I didn't know if he was talking about a fetus, the person having the abortion, or the doctor, when he was like, forcing somebody into this situation is the same as forcing them to be president of the United States. I mean, there was so much wildness. But my favorite thing was when he said, we are not doctors, so our opinions on medical things shouldn't be the first word, but, and then he went on to list a whole bunch of shit that was crazy.
I mean, the thing that most struck me about Justice Alito's dissenting opinion is where he concedes that, yes, there are situations in which a pregnant person's health may be in serious jeopardy absent an abortion, where their fertility may be threatened. And he talks about the situation of premature rupture of membranes, where somebody's water breaks too early in pregnancy for the pregnancy to be successfully delivered. And he basically says, but that's God's will. Like if the pregnant person gets really sick, if they lose their fertility, if they die, Idaho is allowed to choose the fetus over the pregnant person in that situation, and that's okay with him.
Because you know what they never do? They never, like, whenever they're like, that's God's will, it's like God also invented doctors and medical intervention. And so, like, it's always the things that God made, like, there's a cherry picking of stuff that's like, God didn't invent things to make life better, apparently, only to serve this weird patriarchal system.
They're very much like God is here to increase the suffering.
Well, their God is definitely fire and brimstone. So I think that's right.
They're like, if you sluts manage to get pregnant, then you got to suffer through whatever comes with that.
Yeah.
My colleagues at the Lawyering Project actually filed an amicus brief in this case on behalf of a group of doctors who wanted to make the point that their religious and moral beliefs weigh in favor of providing abortion care, and they feel a conscientious imperative to protect their patients' health, including when that requires providing abortion care. And I think that is, that is something that's completely lost on abortion opponents, that they're not the only ones that, that believe in God or that have a claim on conscience or religion. And so for all their talk of, religious liberty, what they really want is to impose their particular religious beliefs on everybody else and to supplant the religious beliefs of anyone who doesn't agree with them.
Well, and we've heard Alito, like, in those undercover tapes, basically saying somebody's got to win, just like in really agreeing with this sort of Christian way of life. And I feel like when the Supreme Court has just reduced itself to the, like, my feelings over your facts sort of, it feels very scary. And after we speak with you, Steph, we're going to be speaking with an OBGYN who practices in Idaho and also does abortion care. And we're going to talk with her about the scenarios that Alito laid out and why that is just such a false narrative.
So as a lawyer, as a person who is a lawyer in the reproductive space, do you feel that the doctors in Idaho should now, because of this pushing back of this, have confidence that they can provide emergency room abortions, those very specific ones, to stabilize a patient without enduring state consequences?
I think it depends on the circumstances, and those doctors, unfortunately, are going to need some legal advice about the circumstances where they can provide care without fear of retribution or criminal prosecution, and the circumstances where they may still face legal risk. Because, despite all of this, it's still very murky in terms of what is legally permissible and what is not. And, as I mentioned earlier, those concurring and dissenting opinions, they don't carry the force of law, but they all take different views about what is permitted by EMTALA and what is required by EMTALA. And so I think there are some areas where doctors in Idaho can now feel more empowered to act in accordance with their medical training, but there's still some gray areas that they're going to have to navigate.
Can we at least stop the airlifting? Like, will we at least stop airlifting patients out of Idaho?
I hope so, for the sake of the patients, but I think it remains to be seen.
As you say that, do we need an EMTALA reckoning? And what would that look like? Do we need to, because of the ambiguity around what EMTALA does and means and all this stuff, how would we get a clarification? Would Congress give us that clarification? Would they have to write something, amend the law? Like, how could we get a clarification on that so SCOTUS couldn't do all this supposing about what it includes?
I mean, yes, that would be one path for Congress to clarify the law, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that.
Not this Congress.
On that happening anytime soon. It's hard to imagine this Congress doing anything.
We couldn't get us 1873 law off the book, so
Exactly. I will note that the Lawyering Project recently filed a case in Idaho on behalf of a maternal fetal medicine specialist at an Idaho hospital, arguing that all medically indicated abortion care continues to be constitutionally protected, and that when the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, its ruling didn't reach abortion care that is medically indicated. That's still just a subset of abortion care, and doesn't cover all of the people in Idaho or anywhere who deserve to have abortion care, but it would cover a broader group of people than EMTALA, which only reaches emergency abortion care. So even, even if someone's health is threatened, if it's not threatened urgently, if it's not, if it's a slow rolling health crisis and not, like an immediate health crisis, it's not covered by EMTALA. And so I think more legal developments remain possible here, and we need to continue fighting, to achieve abortion care, to make abortion care accessible for the largest number of people.
Amazing.
I love that. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us and bringing your expertise to the Feminist Buzzkills pod today.
And for all of the work that you do on behalf of all the providers that we love so very much and the patients who need you. You are a champ, Steph Toti.
Thank you both for having me.
You can find out all about the cases Stephanie and her team are working on at thelawyeringproject.org. Liz, let's move on to our next guests who are the perfect follow-up.
We have two amazing people, Moji. First, an OBGYN and abortion provider who is also co-president of the Idaho Coalition for Safe Healthcare and an Idaho activist whose organization, the Pro Voice Project, is using the power of abortion storytelling to change the personal and political landscape of reproductive rights in Idaho. Please welcome Dr. Caitlin Gustafson and Jen Jackson Quintano.
Welcome, Jen and Caitlin.
Hey, Jen and Caitlin.
Hi.
Hi. I'm so glad that you are both here with us to talk about boots on the ground in Idaho. Caitlin, can you tell us what has been your experience being a practicing OBGYN under this horrible Idaho abortion ban?
Yeah, so I'm actually a family doc who works in rural Idaho. Being a very rural state, we have a lot of family docs who provide obstetrical care across the state. And I've been doing that for about 2 decades in my small town in central Idaho. And the effects of working under these bans has been tremendous. Work in reproductive health in Idaho has changed dramatically. And that happens to me on a daily level in terms of what care I can provide and what I'm experiencing with my patients and the level of distress they have to not be able to access the care that they need. And then there's a whole nother area this is affected in terms of how it's really broken down our system of care, how many colleagues that we've had that have left the state unwilling to continue to put themselves on the line with the criminalization of care here.
Can you just continue on with that a little bit for our listeners? We have talked about closures, whole cloth departments shutting down, and the percentages of OBGYNs who have fled the state. Can you let people know with sort of some tangible numbers, like what that reality is?
Yeah, so the Idaho Coalition for Safe Healthcare, in conjunction with another group in our state, actually looked to know specifically, to try to understand specifically how many of our colleagues had left the practice of obstetrics in the state. And it's at greater than 20% of the OBGYNs that were here practicing prior to the Dobbs decision. That really truly is old data, because we know anecdotally, it's a small state. We know each other. We know more have left and stopped practicing OB here. And we've had, several labor and delivery units close as a result of this. It's really truly a crisis of care where patients were already traveling long distances to access all kinds of reproductive health care. And now we're just seeing the devastation that these bans have caused and worsening that crisis.
And I just want to follow up further for our listeners who aren't familiar. We're going to be getting into the Supreme Court ruling in a minute, but OBGYNs are leaving for reasons of the criminalization and what could happen. Can you let folks know just what the penalties are for OBGYNs and the fear of trying to practice expansive care that's not even abortion care, miscarriage management, those kind of things, and what OBGYNs are facing that's really having them rethink practicing in Idaho?
Yeah, all of us that provide this kind of care are experiencing this new world. You hear the term, the chilling effect, and it's tossed around. And then when you live it as a provider and you feel it even on a day-to-day basis, when you get questions from your colleagues about, what they're able to do in managing, an early pregnancy loss or a patient, who needs other care or is seeking abortion care, it trickles into areas that, I know as a provider, because I'm close to this law and what it says, that, we're currently in legal ground, for example, talking to patients and referring them out of the state. But there's so many providers across our state who can't keep up with this changing landscape. And the thing that remains that sticks in folks' heads is that fear. And what is it? Well, it's a 2 to 5 year, a minimum 2-year prison sentence if you're convicted of providing an abortion that doesn't fall into the very, very narrow exceptions under our essentially total abortion ban.
Is there also loss of license and fines?
Correct. Yeah. There's also loss of license. There's a warning that comes with the so-called first offense, and then total loss of license with the second. And, and if I can just add, you don't even have to be, found guilty for this to be the most dramatic, traumatic thing that's happened to you as a provider, even to have that charge brought, right? Physicians and healthcare providers we work in environments in which we take risks, but we don't count in those acceptable risks the criminalization of the care that we provide, right? That just takes us into a whole new realm that's just frankly untenable for so many. And that's why we're seeing folks be driven out of providing care here, care that they loved to provide before this happened.
Thank you for that. And Jen, because you basically have an organization that helps use abortion storytelling to kind of combat the patient experience here, can you talk about what you're hearing in the world of these bans in your organization when working with people who want to talk about their abortion experiences?
Yeah, Caitlin brings up the fear that physicians have to operate under, the fear of criminalization and what it could do to their careers and their lives. A lot of physicians here are parents, and, the thought of what would happen to their families without them is tough. The fear is also on the patient side, too, in numerous ways. Fear of, trying to find care that may be illegal. What will happen to them? There isn't people have a clear sense that abortion is illegal here. They don't have a clear sense of how that impacts them if they go and seek care, either in Idaho or elsewhere. So there's a lot of fear. And then there's big fear around speaking out about it, talking about abortion, talking about your own experience. There's fear of what your community might do to you. I am based out of North Idaho, and we have a long, very fraught history with extremism and white supremacy and misogyny and all of that ugly stuff. And it's instilled a lot of fear in people here in speaking out about any progressive issues, but definitely abortion. It's a 4-letter word here. So I feel like the work that I'm doing is just this baseline level, getting people comfortable saying the word abortion, saying it publicly, being heard, developing community around this issue. So people can go to an event and see, oh, there's 60 other people here who feel the same way I do. Maybe it's safe to talk about this. And then taking it a step further to share our stories about our abortion experiences and to understand we're not alone in that either, and that there are safe places in which to talk about that. And I feel like a lot of my work is just sort of this example of, okay, I'm putting myself out there. I'm still alive. I'm still here kicking around. If I can do this very publicly for several years, there's a lot of room for the average citizen to do that as well. So that's really where we need to start here in Idaho, is just comfort with talking about this issue, and then we can move on to advocating for it. Because if we can't talk about abortion, we can't fight for access to it.
And if you can't say it, for sure. I also think too, and it's aligned with a lot of the work that we do at Abortion Access Front as well. And it's always important for us to also be centering patients, but also centering providers, because talking about providers as providing a community good and the comprehensive care that they do is really important to be able to create a landscape and create a picture where the other side doesn't get to define what abortion provision is, who abortion providers are, and who people who get abortions are. I think that's incumbent upon us. So thank you so much for that work. Let's get a little bit to the case here, because as we've been following this case, it felt so cuckoo bananas. And when we listened to the oral arguments and we heard the state of our Idaho arguing that, Caitlin, you have every freedom to use abortion care when you need for care. And I feel like maybe that wasn't your experience to safely be providing abortion care in those certain cases.
As you're saying that, like, and Caitlin, please answer the question. I want to remind you that even in the oral arguments, the Idaho person who was defending Idaho said, well, prosecutorial discretion is a thing. Like, he very much left the door open for, like, you can do what you want, but the prosecutors can also.
Right. As if, yes, oh, we're so comforted now. We're fine. This, we can provide the care we need to provide, right? And then, we get the opposite messaging all the time. And then the other thing we're seeing just coming out of this, I mean, it's so clear. It's just the true definition of gaslighting as it relates to physicians themselves, right? Look away. There's no problem here. These doctors are just getting bad advice, right? We're hearing that from our extremist politicians. They're talking to too many lawyers who are making them too fearful. But never mind, right? There's a minimum 2-year jail sentence with this, right? The fact that they can speak about this and say that we're blowing this out of proportion and that we're not really sending patients out of state to get the care that they need in good faith. I mean, it's really, truly shocking.
Yeah, it is. It's really overwhelming. And the not listening to the facts of the case, right? I remember when listening to the case, they're talking about people being airlifted out of Idaho to get care to Utah, of all places. And there was kind of a blowing over this, like it was a nothing burger that no one needed to worry about or care about.
Right. The deep, true misogyny of the whole thing that results in abortion bans, right, was right there for everyone to see. And yes, the attacks on healthcare expertise and the ability of us to make decisions in good faith about our patients. And then this idea that keeps coming up as well, that we're somehow forcing abortions on folks that wouldn't want them, right? Taking away this whole, the whole concept and why we're here, keep the patient where they are and offer them the care, right? It's basically next level stuff, where before it was, don't trust physicians. They don't know what they're talking about. They can't make these decisions. Government knows best. We need to put these restrictions in place because doctors will otherwise take this too far. And they extend that argument even to insinuate that if you walk into an emergency room, that we're going to provide this abortion that you don't want, right? There's this tone about it as if that's even something that ever would happen. And I think you saw that in the exchange over the mental health issue as well, right? This insinuation that it's just a depiction of things that don't happen. And Elizabeth Prelogar handled it well, but it's just, this idea that somebody walks into an emergency room, with a mental health crisis and demands an abortion, and that's how it works, right? There's this complete and total disconnect between the way abortion care is provided and the portrayal that they want to put out there, both of physicians and our patients.
Well, and Alito in his dissent, it was pure crack pottery. He just announces, members of this court are not physicians and should be wary of expressing medical opinions, which is laughable because that's all this dude does 24/7, 365. But then he presents these opinions. And, I would love to take this one step further, just to tell people, to remind them that if someone comes into an emergency room presenting with mental health issues and they are pregnant, could we just all say that you would treat the mental health issues?
Right. And, abortion might be a choice for that patient, but that has nothing to do with the EMTALA circumstance that was at hand, right?
Right.
Not the standard of care to end pregnancy when someone's like, I'm feeling kind of down. You're not like, well, I know how to take care of that. Let's go.
Abortion. I'm hungry. Abortion.
Mhm.
I want to go to Six Flags. Abortion. Like, what are you even saying?
Yeah, but it falls perfectly in line with, that the mantra that we're, way out of line, way out of step with medicine, that abortion providers aren't really doctors, right? We've seen that thread for decades, well before Dobbs, that abortion care itself was siloed from medicine, even within my own field. That has played out. And then extremist politicians and extremist justices on the Supreme Court take that to next level.
To even just go in the idea that our Supreme Court justices are not doctors, Barrett actually followed up in her concurrence, which is weird, that viable fetuses must be delivered and not aborted. And I brought this up when we were talking to a lawyer earlier today, when we were talking to Stephanie Toti. But it just seems like that's creating a problem that doesn't exist. Obviously, if you present with a viable fetus at an emergency room, I would imagine the primary standard of care is to deliver said fetus, not to abort it. It's just weird to me that she felt the need to reiterate that in her concurrence.
Absolutely. Again, just another, misinterpretation of, or malrepresentation of the way medicine is practiced in ways that just aren't true or aren't based in reality. And the complete mismatch we have between medicine as it's practiced and the law as it has come down in states like ours. I mean, look at the, abortion bans. I read one of our bans, there's several, right, that were intersecting, and they're short, they're a page and a half. And I remember reading over and over and over and still had no idea what they meant, right? Because they have nothing, the point being, they have nothing to do with the actual practice of medicine. And you just hear these outright lies fly around from non-medical folks about the way medicine has been practiced. And that's a perfect example.
Even in the time of Roe, one of the things that we would often say, Liz, particularly in this organization, is that the confusion is in fact the point, right? They want to build these things that are really indecipherable to just make everybody spend all their time trying to figure out what they mean rather than get to like the substance of their jobs. I wanted to ask you really directly, just to go circle right back to the actual ruling that happened. As a doctor who cares for pregnant people in Idaho, does this ruling or this non-decision make you feel safer from being prosecuted for stabilizing a patient in crisis in Idaho?
There is a very fleeting moment with this decision of, okay, breathe. We have EMTALA. It applies in such a narrow circumstance, right? That even a complete decision in our favor it's a very narrow aspect of abortion care, right? The very narrow circumstance of someone who requires that in an urgent time frame because of the complication that they're facing. So every time we get a chance to help a patient and take care of them in the way that is meant to happen, because in the time frame that they need and the place that they need to, specifically with their own doctor and their own healthcare system, I mean, that's important, right? So for every patient that couldn't get that yesterday but was able to get that today. But then the reality of the situation is that overriding chilling effect. Will doctors, feel comforted by this while still practicing in a state where the attorney general goes out and just undermines every bit of expertise that we have in this area and outright threatens us, right? Will having this ruling really result in more patients being able to stay in the state and get the care they need? We'll see. But again, it's really, truly disappointing to be sitting here and just hear, this just got punted back to a lower court. And here we go again through this fight. They had one chance to establish just the most critical small area of abortion care that's so obvious to all of us that needs to be there to keep patients safe, and they couldn't even do that.
Yeah. And Jen, I wanted to talk to you because, for people who don't know geography, Idaho is kind of this, it's long and kind of goes like that, and it's very rural. And Jen, if you could give our listeners what a person who needs abortion care, because everyone who needs abortion care should be able to get that care. And what is the journey for somebody in Idaho who is seeking care? Like, where are they looking? Where do they have to travel to? I'd love for our listeners to have a picture painted of how cruel the journey is for somebody who's got to find an abortion.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's cruel on so many levels. I mean, there's the distance you have to travel, whether that's to somewhere in Washington or Oregon or even Utah, which is nuts to me that like Utah is on the board as like a safer place to go. I lived
So
in
nuts.
Utah. There's the distance aspect, but then there are all these other aspects to it. There are a lot of people that can't afford to travel that distance, that don't have the vehicle to travel that distance, that maybe are in a relationship that doesn't allow them the freedom to travel. Then you have the fact that people are dealing with really difficult decisions about, getting an abortion, and they're having to leave all of their support networks behind to find that, travel great distances. They're not with their family and their friends. They're not being held by their support network. They're not with familiar physicians who have treated them for years, who they know and they trust. They have to go to a very foreign place to receive the care that they need, especially for those who are dealing with fetal diagnoses, and it's really tragic, and that's a tough thing to wrap your head around. And then suddenly you have to leave everything behind to go find the care that you need. It's tough on a lot of levels, and it definitely disproportionately affects those who lack means, to access care. It's tough. It's tough.
And I would also just like to add that privacy is a privilege when it comes to if you need means to seek abortion. I just want people to really think and have compassion and try to think of a different world where if somebody doesn't have means and they need care, and this is almost anywhere, how many strangers you have to tell your abortion story to try to access funds for your abortion or practical support funds. And if I'm just of the belief that we should be working towards everybody being able to access the care they need if they need funds. They shouldn't have to tell their story a million times over. It's not fair. And that part of it for me has always been upsetting, where I know people are very well-meaning when they're like, oh, I would like to offer my couch. And it's like, gosh, wouldn't it be great if you could instead offer means so that somebody could travel with a companion, not travel at all, but if you have to, travel with a companion, check into a hotel where it's a keyless hotel, where you don't have to see a stranger, and you could have the abortion you needed with dignity, even in these times where we're trying to strip that away from people.
Yeah.
That's my filibuster.
And, abortion funds do amazing work, and they're way overtaxed right now, and they don't have the funding and resources to help everyone in the capacity that they need to be helped. And so I am seeing communities around the state really step up and help people within their community and raise funds within their community, which is fantastic. And as you said, Liz, it also means that 60 people in your community know that you're struggling with this. Your story has to be spread pretty wide for you to get the thousands of dollars you need to travel. And that's not how everyone wants to handle. Not everyone wants to take out a billboard that announces they're getting an abortion in order to get an abortion. So that's tough too. And to go back to the EMTALA ruling, one thing that I've been thinking about is because, as Caitlin mentions, it's so narrow in scope. This really just is tackling a very small percentage of the abortions that need to be provided for people. And by kicking this to a lower court and continuing this ridiculous debate about whether we should save patients' lives and preserve their health. I mean, why are we debating this? But here we are. We're going to debate this for another year, maybe, or more. It's going to get kicked around in the courts. It may go back to the Supreme Court. And so the longer we talk about this one narrow exception, the more the debate calcifies around that narrow idea of what abortion is about. And so it just makes the conversation move that direction, where suddenly the only worthy abortion is the emergency one. We're not even talking about the 99% of other reasons why you would need abortion care. And so I really am concerned that by kicking the can down the road, we're going to just focus more and more on these medical emergencies and not think about the bigger picture.
I think that is so valid. And I 100% agree, because it does create that there's good abortions and there's bad abortions sort of scenario. And I feel like if we demand perfect narrators and perfect scenarios for people who need reproductive care, we're going to lose every time. And it's politicians who are always setting those up. How can I sell this? You don't have to sell it.
Right.
If 1 in 4 people access abortion care in their reproductive lifetime, you don't have to sell it. People know. Thank you for making that point. I think that's really important. Last thoughts as we look at EMTALA and we think about how we could help folks in Idaho and how we could spread the word. What's the word we should be spreading for folks who are not in Idaho? And how should people be rethinking where we are at and where they should be participating? We'll start with you, Dr. Gustafson.
Yeah, I guess what comes to mind for me is that, even if you're sitting in a so-called blue state, watch what's going on in Idaho, because it's the rhetoric and the way, as Jen pointed out, that abortion is treated, that it's othered within our society and within medicine. And that is everywhere. That isn't just limited to the red states. It's just more outright, and it's, printed on paper at the legislature. But I think it's really critical that we continue to educate folks about all the reasons that folks need abortion care, how common it is, a lot of the things that have been said on this podcast, that it is just part of healthcare. It's not this special area over here, that even folks who are, supportive of a ruling in EMTALA, on the US side and against the Idaho argument, there's still a ton of pigeonholing of this care that isn't helpful in the long run. We want to build back better. We want to do better in the end than what we had with Roe, when there's, again, imaginary lines of what's acceptable and what's not. We have to work towards a place, because otherwise we'll just continue to be vulnerable to whoever's definition outside of medicine is acceptable or not when it comes to abortion, right? And so I think for all the listeners, for all of us to just think about how we build back better is the way I like to say it. Build back with a better understanding. And I take responsibility for that within medicine itself. How do I educate, within medicine, that we just don't go back right where we were before that led to this? Medicine made this area of abortion care very vulnerable on so many levels. And it was easy prey to these extremist politicians. And we're seeing that play out in Idaho, but no state is going to be immune to that.
And Jen, talk about how storytelling plays a gigantic role in all of that.
Oh yeah, it's in the political realm, abortion is just this, like, it's boiled down to black and white, right? Good and bad. It's not a very expansive container to hold the abortion experience. And so I think it's so important to share all of these stories, this huge library of stories, far and wide, so we can add more nuance to this topic. And as I talked about earlier, so we're not creating these are good abortions and these are bad abortions. There's just abortions, and people need them for so many reasons. And the storytelling, makes the conversation more expansive, and it invites more people in because it emboldens people to share their stories as well. I've seen that time and again. People who didn't want to touch this issue with a 10-foot pole, they come to one of these events, or they hear about one of these events, they come in contact with one of these stories, and it touches people's hearts, and it engages them. And real quick, I have a story of a Methodist minister who attended one of our stage productions and afterwards felt compelled to start including abortion in her sermons. And she preaches at congregations, small rural congregations across southern Idaho. And she's been preaching about abortion. And, Jesus in the Gospels, she says he was a healer and he was willing to break rules to heal. If he were to manifest today, would he come back as a physician in Idaho? Willing to break the law in order to save women and their futures. And I just love that. That's the ripple effect of one of these storytelling events. You never know what's going to come of it. You can't plan for that, but stories have the ability to open up people in that way.
I love that. I think that physicians who are not actively sons of God should not have to take on the risks. But I think that story is incredible. And that's also part of the experience of working at Abortion Access Front. We talk about abortion so much. And I find that since I've worked here, even in the bright blue state I live in, people, I say I work at Abortion Access Front, and people want to tell me their abortion stories. And it's really a wonderful way for people to feel healed and connected and just work to destigmatize abortion. Jen, Caitlin, I'm so glad that you both joined us on this day. I wanted to say momentous, but I think we all feel like it's better than it could be, as opposed to like truly celebratory. But thank you for coming and talking about Idaho and giving us just a broader perspective of what's happening in the state with the people that we care about there.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you
so much.
Important reminder, rural conservative spaces are not lost causes. They're actually the neediest cases. Please consider donating to the Pro Voice Project to help change the abortion conversation in Idaho at theprovoiceproject.com. And you can support Dr. Gustafson's work at the Ohio Coalition for Safe Healthcare at idahocsh.org/donate. Links and all their social handles will be in the show notes.
We wanted to round up the podcast with somebody who has had an experience navigating these horrible abortion bans. You may know our next guest from watching him tell his family's tragic experience, either on Twitter or all over the media recently. He has had a horrific experience with the Texas abortion bans, and he's here today to talk to us about what it means for him and his family and what EMTALA means for him and his family.
Their story is truly horrific. When Ryan Hamilton and his wife found out their fetus had no heartbeat at 13 weeks, a doctor at a local Texas clinic sent them home with a misoprostol prescription to finish her miscarriage. After she hadn't passed the fetal tissue after 3 days, they went back to the clinic. A different doctor on staff did not examine her and wouldn't treat her further. Fearful of sepsis, they immediately drove to a hospital they had a relationship with an hour away for treatment. They'd been at the hospital for 4 hours when they were told she was not quite sick enough to have a D&C to surgically remove the remaining tissue. The hospital doctors gave her additional misoprostol and sent her home again. Later that day, Ryan found his wife unconscious and bleeding in their bathroom. He dressed her while she was unconscious and took her to the ER, where the attendants there said, "Thank God you brought her because she was still bleeding and could have died. Fortunately, she's alive and is regaining her health, but she shouldn't have had to go through this." Ryan's been sharing this story with everyone because his family lived through a manufactured injustice that no one should have to endure. Please welcome singer, songwriter, radio host, and unexpected reproductive rights advocate, Ryan Hamilton.
Ryan, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to have you.
You know, Moji and I really wanted to talk to you on this day and talk to people who have had this experience at the hands of what happens when a government decides that someone shouldn't have all the available healthcare they need to save their life. And what we learned in this ruling today, it wasn't a win. It was a small sliver of people. We just interviewed an attorney who just basically said 3 people in Idaho will now be able to access abortion care when they need stabilization, which, if we're looking at that as a win right now in America, it's so sad. But we know that this ruling only also affects people in that circuit. You live in Texas in the 5th Circuit, and your 5th Circuit came with a 100% different ruling that basically said the state of Texas does not have any obligation to save the life of their patients. And so tell me what this means for you and your family right now. Like, how are you initially feeling hearing this?
So it would not have changed the circumstances for me, my wife, or my family at all. I was really hopeful that we could go, okay, now, God willing, my wife gets pregnant again and we're going to, try again. And then if something goes wrong, wanting that comfort of like, okay, but we're okay this time. And this ruling comes with the weight of knowing that we're still not okay, that nothing has changed. This did not change anything in Texas. And the EMTALA, the 5th Circuit in Texas, basically ignores that. They ruled that has nothing to do with abortion in Texas, essentially. So they just go, nah, everybody else can do that. We're going to do something different here. So this ruling, this kind of, okay, you can have emergency abortions if it's deemed enough of an emergency, is, I guess, sort of good for some places, but not in Texas. It doesn't change anything. If anything, it makes it worse because the doctors are already having to check with their legal teams, just like they did with me and my family. We sat at a 3rd doctor's visit while they left for hours. And then I'm assuming we're meeting with their legal team to try and figure out what they were allowed to do. Now there's even more confusion. Now the doctors are going to have to go, okay, hold on. There was a new ruling, but not really. They sent it down to the lower courts. So now what the fuck are we supposed to do? Because there's something different. Is it different? Is it not different? It's infuriating because it's a non-decision. And I hate seeing it in the news and being spun as some sort of win on any level, because it is not the Supreme Court, in my opinion. And I'm just a guy from Texas, family guy from Texas. I got thrown into this. I'm trying to learn and educate myself as I go here. But to me, the Supreme Court had the opportunity to do something and decided not to. So what does that mean? Does that mean they have blood on their hands, just like all of these other people that I consider to have blood on their hands as far as my wife is concerned?
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
They have blood in Texas. They have the blood of Idaho, especially since January, since they let their stay intensify the issues in the abortion ban in Idaho. Absolutely.
Also, just throwing in Sam Alito's dissenting opinion, which we just talked about with Stephanie Toti earlier, to preface your opinion by saying, we are not doctors, and then to create and invent medical scenarios that are not congruous at all to this case, or that if someone goes through them, it's tragic and they should be helped, or basically saying God's will. That's really appalling.
It is.
Really is.
Yeah, and I have heard a lot of that, especially where we live in the rural part of Texas, where it's, Trump country, very conservative. If you say anything out loud against Trump, it's dangerous. No joke. That's a dangerous thing to do here. And to see Alito didn't he compare the abortion thing to experimental cancer treatment?
Yes.
In his
Yes.
dissent. So that infuriates me, of course. And I'm trying my best to make sure my anger has direction at this point. And that is directed at fixing the problem so nobody has to go through what we went through. And I have to walk around here in public and be careful, because if I'm not, people at the grocery store, it's open carry here. Everybody has a gun, and everybody has the bumper stickers you can imagine. It's "Let's Go Brandon" everywhere. So I have to save my anger for, I'm going to use the word opportunities like this, and I have to bottle it. I have to go out into the world and bottle it, or I risk the safety of my family. So as angry as I want to get about all of this, I can't really. And the irony of all of it to me is that the other side that will go, yeah, this is great. We love this. They're delaying the decision, probably because they're going to say some really awful stuff in their ultimate decision, and they get to go outside and be loud about it. And if I do, I'm in danger. That is a fucked up place to be.
It's a real fucked up place to be.
Is there any part of your community, in your Texas community, where you feel sort of safe and embraced in how you've been vocal about your story and what happened to your family?
And can we help you find those people if you have not? Because we do know the people. We do know supportive people.
Well, I wish it was Austin, but it's not. Where I live is not. And to answer your question, no, there are people that know what happened to us and have very quietly sent a card in the mail or things like that. Very I need to tell them that I support the laws getting changed and what happened to her was horrible, but it's very quiet. Very I can't really tell anybody that I went over to there and said, I'm so sorry. The Christian conservative base now is something else. It is something else now. And they're proud of this new version.
Yeah.
That's scary too. So
yeah. And the denial.
Yeah, I know.
The denial that your story's real.
I know.
That's what I wanted to get into as much, because you've reported that you've received so much online backlash since you've been outspoken. So this is not your neighborhood. This is just the online.
Correct.
And I'm wondering, what was most surprising to me is that even supporters of abortion rights have been criticizing you as a man for speaking out.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because that kind of friendly fire was completely unexpected for me.
And I also want to tell those people to shut the fuck up.
Also
Yeah,
that.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me say this. I didn't know it was rare for a guy to speak out.
Oh, Ryan, we're
No.
gonna sit you down sometime over drinks.
No, but really, some people told me this and I was like, do these guys not have wives or moms? What's the deal?
Apparently women don't occur to them.
They don't care. They're just like, oh, that's sad. Sucks for you. I'm not going to say anything about it, but it's too bad. I have that thing inside me that I thought all men had, where you fucked with my family. You almost killed my wife. That's not anything I'm going to be quiet about. And maybe it's an advantage of not being able to go out in the world and be loud out there, because now I can be loud like this and millions of people are paying attention. Never did I think millions of people would be paying attention to me or what happened, but apparently it's rare for a guy to speak out. And I think that's really sad. Two things happen though. One, they feel like they can attack me on a different level because I am a man. So they speak to me in a very aggressive way. And I don't think for the most part, I mean, there's some terrible people out there and we've witnessed the worst of it, but I don't think they would speak to a woman the way that they speak to me. And that's okay. But maybe that's a reason these men don't want to speak up, or maybe they did and they got a small taste of what that's like. And that was enough for them. But the backlash from the supporters, oh, a man is finally getting some attention. Women have been trying forever. And now he's getting the attention. What is that about? Again, never expected that, because I want to go, you want me to stop? I'm getting the attention that may inspire change, which is selfishly for my wife and family. And I'm glad it's helping lots of other people. But that's my reason for doing it, is the people in my life that I love, that I almost lost and did lose a baby. People seem to forget
Yes.
that we lost a baby.
Yes.
Right.
And it's obscene. People need to just let's get on board together. Yes, I'm a man. Yes, I'm talking about it. I hope more men do. Are they afraid? I don't know. If I need to be the one, I'll be the one. Let's go.
But I also feel too, Ryan, like the thing that makes me super mad about that is the fact that your wife you experienced it together, but your wife physically experienced this thing, right? And
course.
almost died. And the fact that you have said, I need you to heal and I will tell what our family went through is actually how it should go. Why do we always expect
Great
those
point.
who have been through so much to have to be telling the story over and over again? And my other point where I wish I have a bunch of reasons why I think men should get involved. You know, one, like nobody ever got pregnant from a vibrator. So hello.
Yeah.
I feel like that's just in and of
Not
itself a
once.
really
Yeah,
good
yeah.
reason. Not one time. But also the lion's share of the people who are crafting these laws and reducing us to chattel and literally like weenie garages are men. It is men who are trying to destroy us. So the men who think that maybe we should be around should also be part of the fight.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Amazing point. And I hadn't even thought about it in that way, to be honest.
As you were talking, I remembered, like, you know, the women in Texas who were recently denied any relief by the Texas Supreme Court. I'm sure they all have supportive husbands, but I don't recall seeing a single picture of one of them.
You know what's interesting? So Amanda Zarowski and her husband Josh have become friends. And what a weird thing to bond over, first of all.
She was just on the podcast 2 weeks ago.
She said she had a great time. I asked her about it whenever I first spoke to you. And I was speaking to Josh, and he is all about it, wants to try, but, you know, was telling me that the people they work with, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that they feel comfortable, like kind of getting in there and trying to figure it out and crack the code. And how do we get more guys to be involved? So they are there and they're doing it. The disconnect is they don't have the level of, you know, comfortability. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Comfortability.
We're going to use it. That's the word
Okay,
we're
let's
using today.
I'm from Texas. We say some funny shit here sometimes. So excuse me.
Yeah. I mean, not everyone's a good spokesperson. I mean, that's the other thing.
Right.
So I speak for a living. That is what I do for work.
Mm-hmm.
So I am 100% comfortable doing it. And I didn't know that was going to be an advantage. And to hear these other men who want to do something, but they're not comfortable doing this part. That's frustrating because their heart is in it. They're there. The guys are there. They're just trying to figure it out in a different way.
Mhm.
So I don't know how we get it from there to more people doing this. I don't know.
I feel like, Ryan, part of what your activism could be is exactly that. You know, it's like sometimes people say to me, like, can you gather your white women and tell them how to look at the larger landscape of how to talk about abortion? Who do we center? How do we do it? And I'm like, that's a good role for me. You know, I think you are like a dude's dude. You're sensitive. You're smart. You're like, you know, when I talked to you on the phone a couple of weeks ago, I was like, you're like every guy that I would have watched on the WB and like been like, I like that guy. He's like, you know, you're like not a fucked up Tim Riggins. You're like the not fucked up Tim Riggins. And so I'm like, okay, you know, there it is. But I think that it's a great package and it's a great thing that you can bring to the party shit that I can't, that Moji can't. And I think it's cool. And I think you're doing it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I never, ever wanted to be here.
No,
Never.
no,
I don't. And the fact that I'm here now and I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, is going to result in some backlash, like you guys mentioned. And that's okay. We're still figuring it out. I wish people could see the amount of the amount of like, oh, it actually takes a lot for him to get out there and talk about this. And that to me, I really count on the support because it keeps me like, okay, I'm going to have to keep talking about this. It's not fun, but I'm going to have to do it. So that support helps a lot. And when somebody who has the same beliefs as I do is coming at me like, oh, a man is getting some attention. Honestly, that's hard. That's been one of the hardest pills to swallow. Yeah.
It is hard, but let's talk about support, right? Because
Yeah.
that is a hard pill to swallow. It was a hard thing to find out. But what can your fellow Texans and us, but your fellow Texans do to help support you in this fight?
and help make change.
Well, that's a really hard question because one, I don't think we're going to change any conservative Christian's mind at this point. I think they are gone. They drank all the Kool-Aid. They're fucking crazy people at this point. I don't think that we're going to do anything to convince them otherwise. So my answer to that question would be, don't waste your time on those people. I'm all about us supporting each other, but it has been left up to us, those of us who have retained our sanity and common sense, empathy, compassion, all of those things that ironically are Christian values have now been left behind by the crazy people. So it's up to us. We cannot sit this out. That's the thing here in Texas. I don't want to vote for either of them. God, you have to. You have to. We have to show up. Those of us who want to support the women in our lives, who have been amazing to us and would like to save them whenever they're almost bleeding to death at home, you have to vote. You absolutely have to. So if they want to support me, I don't necessarily need to hear from them. I just go vote, and let's not take the chance of this country ending up. The reference of The Handmaid's Tale happens all the time, but it's where it's headed.
You know, Moji always likes to say, and I quote you a lot, Moji, when people have like, you know, I don't want to vote for either of them. I'm like, here's the deal. Who do you want to fight? I want to fight somebody who is not a raving lunatic, like somebody who might allow me to also continue to fight and not ban my constitutional right to actually take to the streets and try to make change.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the other thing. It's only the beginning of this horrible nightmare. This is the beginning of it.
We still haven't normalized the nightmare. It's still shocking to us, but give it 10 years.
Yes.
And this is just the way treatment happens.
But I think we've normalized some things that 10 years ago we found horrifying.
Yes.
I think that we're constantly in a continuum of looking at things that we would find unacceptable, that people have been like, you know, well, maybe I'll settle for that then. If the
Yeah.
other option is this. And that's, I think, the whole point of them.
Mhm.
And so, for people who have kids, I mean, both of you have young children. I want your children to have a planet and have a future and have safety and have options and be able to pursue their dreams. And that's what we're voting for. The
Yes.
people who can't leave. Whenever I hear rich people being like, if depending on how the election goes, I'm just going to move to France. I'm like, oh, how lucky for you just to leave people behind who actually need advocates, who have some skin in the game and who can actually get arrested and maybe not get
Mhm.
murdered. So,
Yeah.
I love in some of the articles that I've heard you speak on that you are committed to staying in Texas and continuing the fight
Oh, yeah.
in Texas, because we need people in Texas fighting what's happening in Texas. We can't do your fighting from New York. We can only cheerlead, back you up, and support you.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I don't understand that argument. Oh, it's bad. Leave. And leave it in the hands of the crazy people making these laws? No, thank you. My
Right.
family's here. My wife's family's here.
Well, and that's why our work at, so much of our work at Abortion Access Front has been, we did a massive tour a couple years ago throughout the South just to help the people like you
Mm.
grow their activist bases. When you do a comedy show and bring 400 people into a room, that's 400 progressives that a lot of times small activist organizations didn't know existed. And especially I love people who know that it's the long haul and you may not win the battle, but you're not going to cede the entire conversation and way of life to a group of orcs, literally orcs.
Mhm.
Something really interesting has happened and continues to happen, and you just reminded me of it. So I have a lot of friends in the entertainment business and in the music business in particular. And I've had a lot of friends be vocal online with their support for me. Kate Hanley from Letters to Cleo.
Oh, I love Kay. We did it. I did a bunch of stuff with her for Bernie in 2016.
Amazing. So yeah, Kay and I go way back. My friend Bob Schneider, Drew Carey. I have a lot of great friends who have been vocal about their support. My friends in country music said, a couple of them, I don't want to upset my fan base. I'm sure you understand. So sent me private messages. They will not be public about their support for this because they know that their fan base is very conservative and very Christian. That to me was shocking because the human level of that, these are my friends. A couple of them not my friends anymore because I couldn't believe that this went the way that it did. But there is a whole part of this country that is just like my country music friends. They probably agree with me, but they don't want to say anything for anyone else to hear.
And that's those are hard choices to make. I've had to make those choices too. And it's sometimes I'm like, and I've said to some people, like, is it worth taking their money?
Right.
You're doing the Lord, the sky, whatever anyone believes work. And thank you for doing things that are hard when you're also going through it yourself. I think it's really great because you've seen a world outside of yourself for other people. And it's just really admirable in these days when people are so insular and so self-obsessed. So thanks so much, Ryan. It's really been great getting to know you and for being on the pod.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you.
You can follow Ryan's journey and ongoing activism at the Ryan Hamilton on all the socials. And as always, everything we talked about today, all of the links, they'll be in our show notes. And you can find the best, most up-to-the-minute resources on accessing abortion care and funding for your care on our website, aafront.org. Our Charlie chatbot in the bottom right corner will walk anyone, anywhere in the country through their options and resources for an abortion.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. And thanks again to Stephanie Toti, Dr. Caitlin Gustafson, Jen Jackson Quintano, and Ryan Hamilton.
The fight continues, people. But did we make you smarter today? Did we make you laugh? Did we give you some motivation? I hope so. If we did, show us some love by liking and subscribing, giving us a 5-star rating. Plus, you can stay connected with us on social media at Abortion Front across all platforms. Let's turn our enragement into engagement.
One thing you can do right now is demand our legislators repeal the Comstock Act, a long-forgotten 1800s relic revived as a dangerous weapon against abortion access. Initially created by Anthony Comstock to suppress what he deemed obscene materials, this act is now being used to halt the distribution of birth control and abortion information. We must act now. Visit aafront.org/Comstock Act and sign our petition today.
Let's repeal this fucker.
Let's fucking repeal this fucker.
Seriously. Also, other activism, looking for doing some more things, want to really get involved? We've got a 5-part activist training series called Operation Save Abortion at operationsaveabortion.com. And while you're there, visit our super cool activist calendar, which is full of local and national actions and educational opportunities. Next week, we're dark for Independence Day. Let's fire whoever wrote that in our script.
Juneteenth already passed. What are you talking about?
Independent from what? Whatevs. We're taking the holiday. We'll eat some barbecue and we'll watch some fireworks, but we're not celebrating independence because ain't nobody got it. But the following week, we are going to one of our happy places, Netroots Nation, where we will be doing the pod live in front of a studio audience at the conference that is the largest conference of progressive activists in the United States. I am so excited. And we will be bringing you live our dear friend Pamela Merritt, who is the executive director of Med Students for Choice. And what are we going to be talking about, Moji? That Idaho isn't isolated.
Oh, what a wonderful concept. And of course, she's the best person to talk about that with.
Yeah, we'll be breaking down the larger crisis of states like Idaho, but it's Missouri, Louisiana, all these other states that are having a real crisis about retaining physicians and also med students not wanting to go to school in states where the chilling effect is so great that they think that they could be prosecuted. Also, can you even have med students learning about abortion in some of these states? We're going to talk all about it with Pamela.
Also, join our Patreon. You'll support great content and get cool FBK merch and experiences. All pledges support this pod and all of our activism at Abortion Access Front. Pledge at patreon.com/Feminist Buzzkills. FBK is edited by Remy DeTournay and is produced by Abortion Access Front.
Until we see you again, have a great one.
Bye.
Feminist Buzzkills, the podcast from Abortion Access Front. New episodes drop Friday. When BS is poppin', we pop off. And if you want to support our podcast and all the work of Abortion Access Front, like, subscribe, and join our Patreon at patreon.com/feministbuzzkills.